Hello, guys. Can you hear me? Awesome. All right. Well, hi, guys. um, First off, I just want to say that I'm really impressed with this group. In the past class, I told you guys like the talent was amazing as well, just like in this one. It's just that I think my approach was a little different. I kind of like I put a lot of emphasis in the detail part, and I didn't insist enough to get people doing like a lot of renders so I can actually check their work. And then in this class here, I'm actually blown away by the amount of like renders I'm seeing already, and some amazing work. You know, it's like you guys are really, really talented. And let me just move this stuff away from here. And I think I'm just going to be talking a little bit before I start with the Pore's work and everything. That's going to be a lot to see today. Before that, let me just talk a little bit about the likeness part of things. And the most common traps that I find, at least like in my own work. And then I'm pretty sure some of you guys gonna, you know, see yourselves like in my position. So I'm still working on my likeness and trying to get stuff in place and everything. But I noticed that I think like a lot of times when I'm having trouble with my likeness, let me just make sure I mute everybody here so we don't have noise. So you know, it's like there's a couple of things that I like to see in the, you know, it's like when you're sculpting a likeness. And the thing is, like a lot of times you're gonna see likeness that they look like perfect from the front, because the artist is basically like using a front image, right? And he's trying to snap everything into place, like move the edges around until he gets like all the proportions correctly and everything. But then it's not very uncommon that you're gonna spin around your model and then everything's gonna start falling apart, right? There's a lot of examples, like especially like back in the day in ZBrush Central, I would see those realistic characters, and then you work just from a view, right? And then you would start spinning around, it would completely fall apart. And it's because the structure of the skull, you know, it's like the bone structure is not being observed, and then it's very easy to get out of, you know, like the main shapes. And some of the, let me open this one here first. Let me just bring this one up. And I was looking at this website here. You guys can take a look. Probably most of you guys know it. It's called boneclones.com. And basically that's a website where you can order like replicas of bones, and they have dinosaurs, they have human stuff, they have animals. It's a pretty awesome website. And now they're actually selling like miniature versions, I think half size. I don't know if they have 1/3. It's a very cool website. And the thing is, like, you can have access to all those pictures just for reference if you want, you know. So I like looking at the skulls like from the 3/4 view, just to observe like the relationships between, you know, it's like the brow area here and the zygomatic bone. You know, it's like this relationship here, of course, you're gonna have like all this cavity here filled up, right? Like you're gonna have your eyeball in there with some space. And then of course you need like all the mobility, right? So you're gonna have like the nerves in the back and all that stuff. Then you're gonna have the muscles and the eyelids and all that stuff. So this is gonna be filled up, but those relationships in here, although we're going to have some meat in there, it's going to be pretty much like close to this. You know, it's like, of course, depending of the facial expression. So if you're having like a big smile, there's compression happening. And then you have to observe that, like with the squint, right? But if it's a neutral position, you're going to have this relationship here pretty much established already. And this entire gap you're seeing here, from here to here, basically this is the zygomatic muscles coming down to the corners of the lip, and, you know, it's like and helping to elevate and pull them, you know, as you have different expressions. So with that in mind, so looking at my model here, so one common thing I notice, and this is like I do this all the time as well, and you guys probably go through this as well. So this relationship here, sometimes this zygomatic is either too big, you know, it's like, of course, I'm completely exaggerating here for you to see. So for example, like it's either too big, and then you have this gigantic kind of like cartoonish shape that happens right there, right? It obviously a very big exaggeration here, but this is not uncommon to happen. You know, it's like a much more subtle than that, but you know, it's like it happens a lot. So sometimes you build the zygomatic bone too protruded, you know, it's like it's too, you know, forward, and then sometimes this area here is too much, like it's kind of like a Neanderthal kind of thing, you know, and then instead of like something a little bit more subtle. So this relationship here is important, and then obviously in my case here, I think I'm gonna have to build up a little bit more of this area, so bring it forward a little bit, because we have that whole cavity here, and this is like there's bone around, right? Like it's not like this is hollow, there's bone around here. So I'm probably gonna have to build up a little bit in there just to remove that complete gap in there, right? So it gets a little bit more natural. And then another thing I noticed, again, like in both my models and sometimes some of you guys models, is that, for example, like if I have the cavity for the eyes too deep or too shallow, you can tell straight away. So for example, like if my eyes here, let me just hide this. So this is like, just make this guy like that. So if I have my cavities in here too deep, right? It works from the front, and then when it starts spinning, you're gonna see that some of the stuff is gonna stop working, you know? Same with this relationship here, for example, like this line that goes from the corner of the eye right here in relation to the nose. So there's a little bit of a curvature. Of course, I have a facial expression, right? And then the mouth is going all the way back here. But in a neutral mouth, right, you would have something that would come more like that, and then you would have like the corners probably around here, probably lined up with the corner of the eye. If you had like a more, you know, it's like a neutral expression, like of course very roughly here, but it would be kind of lined up with the corner of the eye, you know. So if I go back in here, so I have my expression in there. From the bottom, another thing that happens a lot is that, for example, in this case here, I have a smile, so the thickness of the lips is being reduced a lot because there's a compression happening against the teeth. I still have to make a little thicker here, but that's kind of like the general idea, you know. It's like, so if I have the teeth, like the arch of the teeth in there, so basically the curvature of the muzzle here has to follow that at some point, right? So it follows, and then you can start flaring out around here. But this entire area in the front, it has to look like it's following the structure of the teeth, right? It's important to actually always imagine what's underneath all this structure. So basically, like if you don't have an idea about where the zygomatic bone is and where the, you know, it's like all those other structures, you know, it's like the bridge of the nose is and everything in relation to the skin, it's hard to actually tell what's going on, especially when you start working with facial expressions. But there is a way to actually see those forms in relationship to the thickness of the skin and the fat and all this stuff. You know, it's like what's the thickness in each one of those parts, and that's obviously if you get something like an X-ray, right? So if you get access to some X-rays, if you look Google like for X-rays, you're gonna find stuff like this, you know, and then you can actually see, for example, like the amount of gap that is in between the bone structure to the surface of the face. Obviously, you're gonna find like very different variations here, but see, this one here is kind of like it's almost like an underbite, which is weird because the teeth is very slight underbite, but the skin in here is pretty much like there's a lot of protrusion happening there. And then there's a difference as well, like when you look at the females and kids, you know, this one is a little bit harder to see. But there's always like a big gap, you know. It's like we have pretty big pillows right in front of our face, which are the lips. So here you see like, you always have this impression that's pretty close to the surface, right? Including like this area here, you would think that's really against the surface, but you have like a pretty much like a good chunk of meat in there, right? It's also great to observe from this X-rays, the angles of the mandible, right? And the size of the cranium, which is something that's kind of hard to nail sometimes, you know. It's like if you're working with, like, of course, humans have all kinds of variations, but sometimes when you don't nail the cranium, it throws off the likeness quite a lot, you know. And so for example, like if I'm looking at the cranium, I want to make sure that the back of the cranium is actually wider than the front of it, right? From the top, you're going to see some kind of like oval shape. That's the ideal, you know. Sometimes people are going to have, like in the temporalis here, maybe some more volume, right? Sometimes it's a little bit more flat. I'm going to make this one slightly more flat so we can see it. Flat in there. And then here as well. Just dig a little bit more. So from the top, you should see something similar to this. Not, of course, like each model is going to be different, but what that means is that the back of the cranium here should have, or at least like around this area here, close to the ears, you should be like the widest point, right? Until he starts like going back, and then creating the dome in the back, right? And then you're gonna have all the muscles in there coming from this area, and then you're gonna have this processing here from where your sternocleidomastoid is gonna be, going towards your sternum, right? So you're gonna start all the way here, go all the way there to your sternum, right? It passes through the clavicle and there it connects right there. So yeah, it's important to get the skull correct. Of course, like if you're modeling a character with a lot of accessories and stuff, it's kind of like, sometimes you think like, oh, it doesn't matter, it's not going to show, but it's good to actually start like working on that, For example, like in my case here, I'm not happy with the shape of the cranium just yet, because there's another thing here, especially with the males, that it's almost like they have a line right here before he breaks. For example, you have an angle until here, and then he breaks, and then he creates another angle towards the back. So you kind of like have a little, it's almost like if you want to use like a H polish brush, just again, like to exaggerate here what I mean, just do it like very strongly here. So for example, it's almost like you have a line like that, right? And that one's going to break up into another line, and then you're going to start like a very slow slope, right? But obviously it's going to go like from character to character. But when it comes to females, normally it comes a little bit more straight, so you don't have too much of that slope. So it's a little bit more straight and it breaks more abruptly. So for example, here, let's see if we can find a female. So this one, you see, I don't know her age. It can be maybe like a young person, right? It looks kind of like a youngish female. But you see like how far it goes, like almost like a pretty squarish, right? And then it breaks about this point here, breaks more abruptly, and then it starts like basically like going that slope. And then you see a guy, for example, and then there's the line I meant right here, this point, right? So it kind of goes until here, it's a little shorter, and then it starts like this slope from that point on. So it's like observing this type of stuff, like X-rays is very helpful, and looking at those type of websites, it's just to make sure that you get the landmarks in place, right? Another thing that, based on the conversations we are having, like in the group today, so it came this thing about like using the life gas, right? Life gas or death gas, actually, any of those. So anything involving cast is basically like there is a physical material that's being deposited right on top of the face. So for example, if you have a face like up, so they can actually put all the mask and everything, all the material they're gonna put in there to create the mold, that stuff is gonna create a compression. It's like it's layers and layers of things being accumulated on top of your face, and then that's gonna create a compression against the skin, and then that's gonna create some kind of like deflation sometimes. Lots of times you see like life casts, and then you can barely recognize the person. Of course, like there's no eyelashes or eyebrows or anything like that, so it's harder to recognize, or skin color or anything. But it's extra hard to recognize because of this deflation. When we are working on the Hulk for the first Avengers, what we did, we actually had a bunch of and this is public information. It was in the making of, so I can talk about it. So we had like the scan data that came from Light Stage, which was basically like a non-contact kind of thing, right? So basically like it's a dome of lights, and then you photograph the person and scan at the same time, so you capture both the forms and also the color. And then we had basically like scanned versions of the casts. So the cool thing about the cast is that you're gonna get, like, because it's a physical thing, you're gonna get a ton of detail, like pore detail and everything, scars, micro detail, like moles, everything is captured in there, right? But you cannot trust that much of the form itself for the reason I mentioned. Now with light stage is the opposite. You don't get so much, although like the newest ones, they capture in pretty fine detail, but at least the ones we did back in the day, it wasn't so fine detail, so we could not trust the fine detail that much, but we could trust the form because there is no contact. So basically it's just lights and photographs recreating the whole thing, right? Scanning the whole thing. So that's another thing. So by all means, use the life gas and death gas if you can catch them. I mean, like there's plenty on eBay. And especially when you're sculpting celebrity, more likely, you know, you're gonna find something, you know. Even like old stuff, like Michelangelo has a death cast that his apprentice actually did of him, but it's pretty dirty. Of course, techniques back in the day were not that clean like we have nowadays, right? But you're gonna find like lots of different ones. You have like Abraham Lincoln and all kinds of, but actors, I mean, like all of them, they're going through all kinds of different makeups. It doesn't need to be like a super heavy makeup, but they need like the makeup artists, you know, they're gonna need like a life cast of that person to build up stuff, like to transform that guy into an older person, blah blah blah. So they start from the actual cast, right? So let's go back in here, and let's just like, I'm gonna point you to this guy here. His name is Joe. Let's see if it's gonna pop. So this guy here, he doesn't have a lot of followers. See, he has only 234 followers, but I think you guys should follow him. For this reason, he has a gigantic collection of casts and he posts a lot of them. And he always posts them with a little story, you know. It's like before he reveals who the person is, it's like, oh, so this person, blah, 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 he acted, blah, blah, blah. There's like all kinds of little stories in teasers before he reveals who the person is. So you can actually try to guess based on the scan, on the live cast. And they're beautiful, you know. It's like they have, it has lots of females, males, all kinds of like facial and like beautiful features, you know. It goes like from the more like kind of like this one, right? Like with Sean Connery, a little bit more like crunchy. And so you can see the structure of his eyes with eyes closed. And then you're gonna find like some females, right? Like that, right? So, you know, it's like very cool stuff. And he has a ton of it. If you keep scrolling this page, he has like some of his own sculptures, of course, but he has a ton of those celebrities in there, including Dick Smith. Look, I was sculpting Dick Smith and he has a cast of him. And look at that guy, very recognizable here, right? Because he has such a strange face. There he is. So this is another good source, you know. It's like he actually might have the person you're sculpting right now. I don't remember all of the characters you guys are sculpting, but take a look at his page. His name is Joe's Luck Bauer, whatever. And so, you know, you're gonna find a lot of stuff in there. So if you can follow him, that's a good thing to do. So back to this. Now that we spoke a little bit about the likeness stuff, right? Like I mentioned, like this relationship, like always pay attention to the corner of the eye in relation to the nose position and to the lips, right? I might have to bring this area a little bit forward, actually. Now that I'm seeing it, might have to bring it a little bit forward, but I don't know. Maybe, yeah, I might have to do that. So observe those things, you know. It's like look at skulls, and then especially those points that I mentioned, you know. It's like the corners of the eyebrows here in relation to the zygomatic, and then, you know, the corners of the mouth, and then on top of that, we have to talk about facial expression, of course. Like this is the second one we're doing with the facial expression. So you add some complication because you have to imagine everything that's sliding on top of things, right? And how the compression between those forms is being created. So for example, like if you look in this area here, it's not like a simple form. There's a couple of things happening here, right? And every time you have one form colliding with the other one, you get a bulge. And then it happens in multiple places, right? So you have to always imagine, like, if you're moving a big form, this form is actually shocking against another form and creating a bulge. And that's going to be a constant across the board for everything we're going to do in relation to the face sculpting, and especially when you're, it's like in the process of sculpting and baking facial expressions. When it comes to wrinkles, let's explore some of that. So let me just put this guy back here, and let me just save this. Still working on my likeness. It's being a little trickier than I thought, but I was expecting that because it takes me weeks to get the likeness to look correct. So that's why I hate you guys for nailing them from the get-go already, some of you. But yeah, it's not easy for me. So let's go back to some images in here. Let's talk about the fun stuff. Not the fun stuff. Everything is fun, but I mean, let's talk about detail, right? Because today we're gonna go HD, right? Today we go full retard. We're gonna go HD geometry, and we're gonna try to explore a little bit of that and how we're gonna be sculpting our pores. And I'm glad you guys got totally into the HDRI renders already. So this is gonna be just a little bit of the, it's like the little cherry at the top, right? Because this is just detail. And I'm not gonna say just detail, because at the end of the day, if you're looking for something to look believable, it's just as important as your primary forms. If you want to do the whole thing to look convincing, right, you have to make sure that your detail is convincing as well. Otherwise, there's no way to trick the human brain, right? Humans are specialized in recognizing other humans. Little babies, they're, it's like they recognize things instantly, right? It's hard coded. A little baby can recognize facial expressions, can notice if you're mad or smiling, and they actually respond to that. And we are specialists in faces, right? So the thing that catches people a lot, and this I'm gonna tell you, like at first sight, you're gonna think like, oh, that looks simple, like to sculpt the pores and everything. But if you don't nail, and by nail I mean like if you don't get the ballpark of the distance between the pores and the structure between the pores, it's very hard to trick, because it might end up looking like an orange peel. So it's not quite what you want. You want some more structure in between, some more breakups. It might end up looking like they're too spread out, so it doesn't sell the idea that it's actually skin. This looks like something else, leather or something like that, like from an animal, not for a human. So this disgusting skin here is actually my own skin, so it looks disgusting. I agree. But it has a lot of interesting stuff because my pores are so pretty. Look at that. You can see like those little things, like the structure exactly what I want to, how I want to see. The thing is, like, when you're younger, you're gonna notice like this type of structure in the pores of the face, like in the cheeks. It's much more structured, right? Like you see, like you have the little dot in the middle, but then you have those little rays coming out of it. And my reference here, I'm gonna show you, you're gonna laugh, but here's the thing. Let's see if I can find it. I had it before. Let's see. Here. Look at that thing. That's a couch, right? And those are called like tufted couches, right? So they look like that. So you see the structure of this thing? So there's a dot in the middle, right? And that little dot, it's basically your pore right there. And then from that, you see like how those little rays, right? Like they go and they try to reach out to the next one, right? To create this little network in there. Let me just close this one. Let's see if I find some other ones. So that's basically how what I use as a reference, not a literal reference, but a reference to explain to you guys what I mean by those networks. Let's see if I can find one that's actually fairly clear. This one is, I think, is pretty clear, Let me just, let's see, view image. This one is easier like that, yeah. So you see like those little rays here connecting to the next one. And there's this pattern, right? So it's kind of like a zigzag pattern. And then in between, you're gonna create those little triangles. In this case here, it's kind of like a diamond shape. But in our case, it's almost like if you connected those, you're gonna create those little triangles, right? So split those little diamond shapes into two and you're gonna get the triangles. But here's the catch though. If you sculpt something exactly like this in this perfect zigzag, it doesn't look natural. It's gonna look like a pattern. And then if you do this in the zigzag, right, you're doing zigzag, blah, blah, blah. At the end, you're gonna end up with those lines like I have here. So it's a perfect square line, right, straight line. So it's very important to create an approximation of this, but with some randomness. So you're not going to put like every single one at the top here in line, a perfect line. One's going to be slightly lower, slightly higher, you know. And even when you apply those pores, you're going to make sure that you're rotating them, spinning as you apply them, just to add a little bit more of a variation to it. So now that we spoke about this structure, let's go back here to my pores. And then from the up close here, the first thing you're going to notice is the subsurface that's ridiculous, right? It looks like a gel. And this is very common when you look at any super macro photography of face. It looks like a gel. It's incredibly subsurfacey, right? And that's the type of effect you want when you're rendering a super close up of your shots. And then obviously when you look from afar, all of a sudden looks like, you know, it's not that translucent, right? Just because the translucency is very, very shallow. So it doesn't go that deep into the skin, right? It just goes enough just to create this gel effect. And even here, my hair here, you know, it's like you can see like that translucency and the little dots underneath, like the beard in there. And then you're gonna see that from each one of those pores, I have a little hair coming out as well, which is kind of weird, right? We don't notice those things. But the point here is that you see some kind of like network happening here. So there's a pore in here. See, like I said, you see like there's one. If I create like a triangulation here, let's see if I can do that. Let's pick one color here. Let's see, green maybe, something like that. And then let's see, like, let's link, like connect those dots. So this one is connecting to this one, this one. So there's another one right there. There's another one right here. So it's kind of like a zigzag, right? So from this one goes to there, right? And then this one is now creating this pattern here. If I link the two of them, goes there, goes there, goes there. But now look at this one, how close it is, right? So this one is much closer than from this point to this point. It's much closer to that. And then this one is a little longer now. It changes the shape as well. And then this one comes right here, look. So you see, like, it's not a perfect pattern. If you try to make everything like this, like in a perfect line like that, it's gonna be completely artificial, right? And you're gonna start reading everything as an artificial kind of thing. Let's go back here. Let's see, remove some of those, maybe here, right there. Yeah. So yeah, that's the thing that we're gonna be playing later on when you're sculpting our wrinkles as well. You're gonna be playing this game of connect the dots, right? Because here we have, like, you see, like those patterns, they change, right? It's not a perfect pattern, but they're pretty much like a little diamond shapes, but not perfect diamond shapes. Because of course the skin has all kinds of variations. It's not a perfect thing. It's not a mechanical thing, and it stretches in different ways, you know. And sometimes you get a scar in a certain place, and then the skin has to rebuild around that scar, and then you're gonna get a different shape for everything, right? It's just like the skin regenerating. But the important thing to remember is that this pattern is not a perfect pattern. That's the first thing, right? And then in between those things, you're gonna see, for example, if I get one of those pores, like this little guy, let's see, let's pick a beautiful one here. They're all so beautiful, but they're gonna pick one. So if I get this little guy in here, right? So you're gonna see there is a line going that way, another one like that, another one like that, another faint one like that. So I have those lines that go, and basically like they are actually reaching out to the next point, right? So kind of like, just like that couch, they kind of like, they are compressed. They have this pressure going to a point, and then those little arms are reaching to the next one, right? So all those guys here, if you observe, they have those lines, you know, going towards the next one, because obviously there is pressure in there, right? And those are all like a little pillows, and they have to, you know, it's like to actually behave that way. So you're gonna get all those little guys. So when we sculpt the pores, it's important to actually put some of those forms implicit in there. But another one that's a big catch in here, the first one is this pattern, right? That's completely not patterny, right? There's a very rough pattern in there, but it's not like perfect. The other one is to actually the relationship. So between like the primary and secondary forms, let's say, of the pores, right? when you sculpt in the face, you put a lot of emphasis, of course, in the primary forms, because you want to make sure that the architecture of the skull is good underneath everything, right? That's going to be the support for all the beautiful stuff you're going to add. But then, and then you have the secondary forms. You're going to start adding the you know, it's like some folds and starting putting some of the major wrinkles and things like that in place. So you're respecting, you know, it's like if you overdo one on top of the other one, it basically, like, you can obliterate the primary forms if you go too deep with your secondary. So you have to respect them, right? The same is going to happen for the pores in here. So if you have a pore that's right in the middle in there, you're going to make sure that this pore has a depth, right? So let's say if you have like a line like that, that's the, let's change the color in here. Let's get the blue. And let's make this slightly thicker. So if you have something like this, right? So that's the surface of the skin right there. So you want to make sure that your pore actually happens in a nice, like, fall off like that, right? And then everything else that happens around it is going to be secondary. So by that, I mean, let's see, go back here. Let's see, 3, that's good. So by that, I mean, like, if I have something like that, and that's my main point, like the deepest point, I cannot go almost as deep with those little guys, the secondary stuff that's around it. Those have to be very subtle lines, you know, very deep, and then the subtle lines around. And then in between those lines, you're going to have these little pillows, right? That are going to have to be a little bit more pronounced, a little bit more build up. So you can actually create this structure that connects all of them and creates this nice network. And then obviously the micro stuff right in between everything, then we're going to be dealing with some micro bump or micro displacement. I use micro bump, right? So it's just like a black and white map, or just some noise procedural from Maya, which is what I'm using right now, actually. But another page you guys can check is this one here. This guy, this page, let's see, is this the one? No, that's texture XYZ. So this research here for microgeometry, right, is the one that actually started this whole thing that people are using a lot now. So for example, this is the picture, the photograph, right, the reference. This is the render without the microgeometry, and this is the render with the microgeometry. So you get like this sparkly kind of like specular effect, because it's breaking up the displacement map into micro, you know, structures in there. And by doing so, it's basically like it's changing the angle of them, so they actually reflect the light in a different way. It creates a much more interesting and natural effect, right? So let's just go back here to the page itself. So if you go to this page here, that's gl.ict.usc.edu, and then research microgeometry. Then you're going to get access to all those pages, those materials, and they have downloads. So if you download those things, you can study those, or you can use if you want. I'm not using, but you can use because they already have some images you can actually use as bumps if you want. I think they have even normal maps in there, if I'm not mistaken. And so that's a good research, you know. Like I said, like this is going to be later on in the game when you're actually adding the micro displacement stuff, but it's important to keep in mind. So with that stuff being said, let's do a couple of exercises here. So let's go back here and let's get like a plane. So let's start with the plane. Let's see, ZBrush plane 3D. Before you can sculpt the plane 3D, as you know, you have to transform to a polymesh. So make polymesh 3D. Just click in there. This is the resolution I have. Is only like 1,000 polys. I'm gonna subdivide a couple of times. Control D to subdivide a couple of times. Let's see, 263, 1,000,000 polygons is enough. And then let's explore how I sculpted my pore in here, which was hand sculpted. So there's this single pore. That's good. You'll get this guy. And by default, I'm using a intensity of 42, but when I sculpted it, it was probably deeper than that. So let's try at 100. Let's see if it's too deep. It might be too deep to see. So let's do less than that. That's 60. I probably sculpted deeper and then. So it's basically a butthole. It was so funny because I mentioned the butthole joke to Paloma in the last class, and she actually started posting pictures of, I think it was a donkey's butthole. It was an actual donkey butthole. And she said she would use in her work. She never did, of course, but it was pretty funny. So from the side, let's just turn on the display properties to double. And then you can see the depth in here. And how I was talking about before, you see like this little fall off in there. So it comes into a point, right? So that's basically the main form. So if I smooth this whole thing out, so for example, if I did just like a smooth it out, what has to stick is actually the pore itself, right? It's the hole in there. It has to be clear enough, and it has to be going deep enough like that, right? Now, of course, like with the sharpness, that's how it looks. So I'm gonna keep this as a visual reference for you guys. So you can actually stop the video at this point here if you want to look later. And then this is from the bottom, so that's basically what I have, something like that. And then this from the top. So it's like from the side looks like this. If I turn off perspective, looks like a little mountain there. That's the depth. And then from the perspective, that's kind of like what I have right here. This obviously is not a scientific approach. Like I said, like the entire thing about this class is that we are trying to reimagine or try to represent things in a realistic way without going full on scientific about stuff, right? It's basically like, this is my impression of a pore, basically. I looked at the reference and I thought, yeah, that would make a nice pore. But if you look at like a macro photography of a pore, it's a very different thing. It has all those tiny little flakes and layers in it. It's like it's a pretty different kind of thing. But to create that impression, when I render my stuff, I like the way and the feel of this one, right? So again, the primary form here is the hole itself. That's what has to stick when you're looking from a distance, right? Again, if I smooth it out, I want to make sure that that's what I can read. It's like it's the little dot in the middle. And the other secondary stuff, it has to be there, but not as strong as that one, right? So, and then all this other stuff here is what I said. For example, like if I apply this type of brush to plane, for example, if I start sculpting like this, they have to actually go and connect to the next one almost, right? So basically, like when I do it, I'm going to show you like in another example. Let's, for example, another thing that I forgot to mention. You see, like, it's not just that I'm cutting the surface with those lines. I'm actually building it up a little bit in those areas. So if I get a clay build up in here, for using the clay build up to do this kind of like organic forms for wrinkles or whatever you need to do, instead of using this this square alpha, I normally switch to something like alpha 35 or something like that. So it's a little bit more round. And then intensity very low at 3 or 2. And then I can actually build up those areas in between, right? Just make sure that those read like little pillows. I'm exaggerating here, but so you can get the point. So if I use that one, I can actually build the in-betweens in here and make sure that they all read as something a little bit softer, right? The same way when you're talking about the wrinkles themselves and the facial features that I was talking about, it's like imagine that those forms are always colliding with each other and creating those creases, right? Everything is true all the way to pore level, right? Everything is about physics, right? Like, so if you have a compression happening, you have those wrinkles and you're gonna have to create those little compression points in between those, right? So don't forget to add those, because when you apply those later, it's going to be very important, So if I capture this pore here, let's pretend we just sculpted this one. I just added some different stuff here, right? And let's say I want to go and then add maybe like some more crossing like points in here. Oh, too strong. It's like a little bit more of a little macro structuring here. It all depends. I mean, like you might be able to actually get away with building up the micro structures, everything here in the pore itself, instead of like going to use like the micro displacement. But I would recommend to use the micro displacement because of or micro bump, because it's easier to actually control things, But let's say like if you add some lines like that, and then now you want to capture this. So let's pretend like you started your pore and then you just like created a plane like I did. Try to maximize the area you're using, of course, like in this case here, try to go closer to the borders, right? And then there are two ways to do it. The first one, obviously, is to just go to your alpha in here. I can actually switch brush. So I'm gonna click brush, I'm gonna go brush clone. So I'm not override the original one, right? And then I can just say here alpha, I can just say grab dock, right? So when you do that, now you have your alpha in there. This one got too deep. You see like it's getting dark in the middle. I could make it a little bit less deep than that, but I did that way just to demonstrate it. And then you have your brush captured. Then obviously you can go to Photoshop and crop it and remove the borders, right? So that's one way to do it. And the other one is like the old school way, which is a little bit more, you know, it's not as intuitive, I guess. And when you are about to capture your brush, make sure the perspective is off, of course, right? Turn it off so you can get like a flat on projection. And then you can go to tool, and then they have this old school here from back when ZBrush was just 2D, right, or 2.5D. It's this MRGBZ grabber here, which basically captures everything. So you just asked like, oh, I want to go to edit to 2D mode or something, right? So you switch it, and now you have access to this. So the way you draw it's from the center. So if you click in the center, you're gonna have to imagine the center in here, right? It's not like a precise thing. So if I imagine like this, if you press shift, it locks into a square like that. And then you can go like that. And then when you are happy with it, just release it. And then it's gonna capture both the texture, if you have anything there applied, and then the alpha itself. So it's the same deal, you know, comparing this one here to that one. The difference is that it's already cropped for me, right? So I already created the crop because I defined it in there, but that's basically what it is. So that's the way to capture that type of stuff, right? When you're creating your brush. So to get out of that mode, if you're in 2.5D mode, right? All of a sudden, like you're stuck now, it's like, oh, what happened? So we can just like draw it again, press edit, and then Control N, like Nancy. Then you press it and just clear the whole thing for you, right? You know ZBrush, but you know, I'm pretending that sometimes you guys don't know. So just like little shortcuts and things. So this is very deep, like I said, but when I use this, my effect that I want to get, it's about, I use it about 40 for the detailing. And then let's start with a new plane here, and let's do a little exercise. So let's do plane 3D, make polymesh 3D, subdivide a couple of times, 1 million polygons. And then let's do a little exercise. So if I'm sculpting pores, actually, let's go straight to this guy here. Let's talk about, since we're gonna be sculpting pores, we can sculpt straight on this guy. And then, but before you do that, we have to go HD, right? So that's when the fun starts. And then once you go HD, it's hard to go back because there's no way to go back because you're locked in that mode. No, just kidding. Before I go HD here and explain to you guys how it works, let's talk about the advantages and disadvantages of working with HD. The greatest advantage of working with HD, and this one to me alone, it's already reason for me to use it, is the speed you're gonna export your maps. If you have a mesh like that, and for example, you have like 6 UDIMs, in this case here I have 5 for this mesh, I have this old one, and you're exporting 8K maps, right? You can expect, like, if you, depending on the displacement settings you're using, to wait like half an hour, sometimes an hour to export your maps. And it's a little painful, you know, it takes a long time, especially if you're using adaptive and the DP subpix is a little higher. It takes a long time. But with HD, I can crank the DP subpix all the way to 4, which is the maximum. And I can click adaptive as well. And I still can export like the entire maps, the map set for this guy here in about 7 minutes. That's how long it takes to export everything, like 5 8K maps, which is, to me, is amazing because I can do like multiple passes in a single night, you know? I can be working on the likeness in here and add more detail and in sculpt like fine detail around the eyes and stuff. And then I was like, you know what? I need to go to the bathroom, let me just export those maps. When I come back, it's already done, you know, because I'm a very slow peer. But yeah, it's very cool, man. The biggest disadvantage is you don't have access to layers or morph targets, right? You don't have access to that. Now, you don't have access to that inside of the HD mode. You do have access to that outside of HD mode. And then what I mean by inside and outside is this. So let's go through to the theory here behind the HD and how it works, right? So I have my base mesh here at 17,000 polys. And that's about it. So 17,000 polys. The whole thing about going HD is that in order to export those maps super fast, like I mentioned before, like 7 minutes for all those maps in 8K, you have to respect the simple rule, which is don't pass, I believe like Pixelogic one time they mentioned like don't pass 1 million polygons in the lowest resolution. My rule is like I don't pass 2 million polygons. At 2 million polygons is still pretty fine. But if you go beyond that, then it starts getting a little slower to export the maps, because then it almost like considers over the 2 million polygons to be the new displacement itself without the HD. So if you lock your model to actually go non-HD subdivisions all the way to 2 billion polygons, after that you're fine. So basically, like, okay, I have 17,000 polys here in my base mesh. You guys have about 26 or 25, something like that. If you're using the same base mesh, right, that I sent. So you're gonna subdivide this mesh. So I subdivided one time, I got 69, 277, and then my next subdivision, I got to 1.1 million polygons. I believe for you guys, you're gonna get around 1.6 if you're using that base mesh. And that's ideal. Because if you subdivide once more, obviously they're going to get to 4.4 million polygons, and that's a no-no for HD. So at this point here, I can say, okay, that's kind of perfect. I can go HD from here, right? So normally when you're subdividing a mesh, you're pressing Control-D, which is basically the same as pressing divide, right? So divide, blah, blah, blah. See, I'm not like even concerned about the SUV here, because I'm not going to be using smooth UVs at all. I'm gonna be using just like completely straight UVs. It's easier for me because I'm painting everything inside of ZBrush. It's not like I'm using Photoshop to stamp stuff or Mari, right? If you are doing that, then before you do anything, yeah, you can use the SUV. Although there's this recalculation of UV here that they have, that it's not a precise thing. It never worked very well for me. But, and then in the exporter, you actually have the smooth UV, but I think that one talks to this one. Because I sculpt everything and I paint everything inside of ZBrush, I don't care about that, so I keep it off. But again, so you subdivided your mesh a couple of times, right? Like Control-D or using divide. And now basically like I'm 4 subdivision levels. So now let's go to HD and see what happens here in HD. In HD, you have just one button that says Divide HD. And I still don't know exactly how it works behind the curtain, you know. I think this is all affairs, like is his genius and how he built this thing. But I believe that he stores all this information in kind of like a virtual maps or something like that. Because it's not like it's in the model, but every time you enter or exit the HD mode, I believe he actually reloads those maps or whatever files those are, and then rebuilds that structure for you and shows it. And maybe that's the reason it exports those maps so fast, because it's not like actually doing the ray tracing of the entire thing. It's reading probably from those maps and combining things and then re-exporting, you know. But it's yet to be confirmed. But so when you press Divide HD, first you're gonna notice is this number here. So if you don't have this stuff here visible in here, which is important to have this menu visible, try maybe like different interfaces. So you have like those buttons in here, right? Like the next interface and the previous. One of them probably gonna have those numbers in there. Uh-oh, did it crash? No. Okay. So in this case here, let me pick just this one here, right? This is the one that has it. I have my stuff in place. And then you're gonna notice when I subdivide in here, nothing is gonna happen in here because again, it's subdividing this stuff in a virtual space, right? And this number is not gonna change at all because this number is only representing the non-HD subdivision levels. But you're gonna see the total number of points in here increasing. And then I'm gonna have to calculate that. So for example, if I have 7 million polygons in here, right? One of those million polygons is from the subdivision level I already have. So if I subtract those two, I have about what, like 5.7 million polygons. So I'm gonna have to track this number to see how far I can go with it. So I'm gonna subdivide, I'm gonna click one time. So you see, it changed to 10 million. This one stayed the same. I'm gonna click another time. So that's 25 million now, and that's the same. And the next one, I got to 76 million. So basically like 6 million that I had before, that 6 million was already in the scene, probably because of the other subtools I have already subdivided, right? And 1.1 is from the model itself. So that should be around like 71 point something or 72 million polygons for the HD stuff. So in the past, you would be able to see here, let's see if we can see it. Actually, we can't. Look, like you would say in the past, like the total high definition polygons, and it's not showing it, but I have them in there. I don't know if it shows after I sculpt something, but in the past I remember seeing this number. It would totally show up in there. But anyway, so now we are in theory in HD mode. We already applied the HD mode, but we are not in HD mode just yet. We are just seeing the model as we sculpted at 1.1 million polygons. So now let's enter the HD mode. So the first thing I'm gonna do, just gonna hide the other stuff. So we have just the model itself. We don't need to do that, but you know. First, before you go HD, let's go to the lowest resolution. I'm gonna turn on the polyframe, and I'm gonna look at the UVs, right? We have this already done for your model in there. You probably have your UVs and all your polygroups represented. If you don't, just go to polygroups. And if you click auto groups with UV, you should be able to regenerate them. It's going to split by the aisles you have like in your UDIMs, right? So it's not just UDIM itself; it's actually splitting further. If you just click UV group, that's the number of UDIMs. But if you click auto groups with UV, then it splits further because every little piece inside of the UDIM is going to be split into a different polygroup. So I normally use this one here. Now, if you want to make sure that it's easier for you to hide stuff from time to time, you can create, for example, just a mask that you always refer to when you go HD. So the thing about HD that you have to know is that you have to optimize whatever you're trying to sculpt, right? Because there is a limit. ZBrush is going to hit a limit of probably around like 35, 37 million polygons, and it's not going to go further than that. You see, I have like 96 gigs of RAM in here, and I have free memory 80 gigs of RAM, right? So it's not even using that much. It's using like 16 gigs so far. And I lost my trail of thought, but I'm gonna capture it later. But so in this case here, yeah, that's what I was about to say. You have to actually be very careful what you want to sculpt. For example, like if you have pockets, like the inside of the mouth and inside of the eyes, and you have especially the ears, right? And they are fairly high res in relation to everything else you have. So when you're sculpting the face, I would try to avoid using those areas, you know, it's like making them visible, right? So I'm gonna try to do this first. I'm gonna just hide things here. So I'm gonna switch to this guy here. So make sure you have the rectangle. So press Control Shift, right? And if you have the rectangle, you're good. If you have the lasso in here, then the lasso works differently. Basically, like it selects by row of polygons and edges. So I can actually select a full edge loop. For example, if I click here, right, it just hides the edge loop. But if you have that one selected as rectangle, now it's actually gonna hide everything but the partition you're selecting. So I'm just gonna click Control Shift, I'm gonna press right here. And now I have just this area visible. Control Shift and open a little window outside. I'm gonna reverse it. Control Shift click, hide it again. Same here, Control Shift click, Control Shift click, Control Shift click, click. And then, yeah, bags, and then maybe the carbuncle, I can get it as well. But you see, like, I don't need to use, let's do the nostrils as well. I don't need to use the other stuff, you know, it's like the base I don't need the inside of the mouth right now, anything. So I'm gonna reverse it, Control Shift, open another window outside. Now I have my mask in there, right? So if I go to the highest resolution now, pressing D all the way up, right? Notice that I have my perspective off. So the way the HD projects is basically like this. So if I have something like this and I try to project right here, by projecting, I mean it's like you have to press A in this area here if you want to enter HD. It's almost like a cylinder, a virtual cylinder that's being applied, like facing the normals, right? So it's gonna shoot through the model. And in the past, if you remember, before ZBrush went 64 bits, HD geometry was pretty painful to use because it would just give you a chunk of like maybe like 4 million polygons or 8 million polygons or 10 million polygons, something like that. And then depending on how far you went with your subdivision level, you would just get the nose, and you just have that tiny little area to sculpt in HD. But now it's 64 bits, and it gets those gigantic chunks of 35 million polygons, right? So it's much, much better. So in this case here, instead of projecting from the front, my preference is always projecting from the side, because the cylinder is going to project that way, and then I can get like it all depends of how many polygons I'm going to have in this face here. But normally I get a lot of stuff or the entire face. So I'm going to turn off perspective. I'm going to rest the mouse around here, the nose area. Just make sure I capture the mouse, nose, and mouth, nose, and eyes. So I'm going to press A around here. So press A, and now we are officially going HD, right? Let's see how many polygons we get. So we got about 35.2 million polygons worth of detail, right? Which is great. So we can sculpt the entire face plus the neck in here, right? So much better that tiny little circle that we used to have in the past when it was not 64 bits. And then if you want to see just what's actually HD, sometimes, I mean, like if you don't want to see it like that, you just press solo, and that's going to hide everything other than that, right? But obviously, if you're using a reference, like for example, the teeth and the hair, it's not going to show if you have solo. So it all depends on how you want to approach it. Obviously, you can see here that that area is not going to be affected, right? So you cannot see anything. You cannot touch anything here. If you try to sculpt in those areas, the dark areas, nothing's going to happen. Everything that's accessible is just around here, right? In this lighter area. So in this case here, let's just hide the hair, and I'm going to keep teeth in there. And let's start doing a little sculpting here with the pores. Let's see what time that is, so I can control. It's almost 10:30, so you guys can start the question soon. And I'm gonna go and start the pores. So one thing, before I start this, I have to talk about this. Just a little bit more theory here. See, like this website I pointed you before to, it's called Daniel and whatever the last name is, faces, and then you have zoom in, Matthias or Matthias. We have our kids is Matthias, so we call him Matthias, and he's 8-year-old now. And then so this website has all those different examples, different faces, and this one is a good example here because it has all those variations, right? When you're sculpting pores, at first, when you're doing everything manually, it's going to look very boring. And although you're going to be concerned about not making too evenly distributed, it's still going to look very boring or artificial. But this is the kind of stuff we're going to be adding later, which is like more variation in depth, right? Some bumps and bruises around the skin. There's a little brush I'm going to show you guys that's just to create the blackheads, that kind of stuff. We have a little brush for that. I'm going to show you the profile and everything. But one thing that you're gonna notice is that like the skin changes over time, and when you're young, you're gonna have like a or youngish, you're gonna have all those pores very well detailed, and the structures you can see still like all those little guys. But if you get someone older, you're gonna start seeing like this stuff kind of going away. You're still gonna see pores around the nose and probably the muzzle. You're gonna see some pores. But then all this stuff here, the skin, you get someone like an old lady, but let's say like 90 years old, the skin becomes almost like paper thin. So the wrinkles are much easier to see. Like anything can create like a vast amount of wrinkles, right? Like any little facial expression, because everything is paper thin, right? And the pores, they basically like start dissolving and becoming more like it's like those networks of micro wrinkles in between them. It's almost like they kind of like they lift, right? They're not that little couch got a little soft, it's like an overused, and then so And then, of course, like if you start exploring some of those pictures, you're going to see the difference between different areas. So you see the pores very clearly around this area, and you're going to see very clearly here as well, especially, you know, like with the stubble and everything. But then when you get around here, can you see any pore in here? Probably not, right? They are basically like they became those wrinkles, like I was mentioning before, that they kind of like start propagating if, the older you get. But this is the cool area here that I like to explain normally when I'm sculpting stuff, because we're gonna be putting those pores in place, but we're gonna have to leave a little buffer area between what becomes wrinkles, especially old people like I'm sculpting right now, and then what's pores. And then that's basically where we're gonna create like the in-between, right? We're gonna have to start like transitioning those pores into wrinkles. And you see like they are going all the way here, but they are probably not as deep anymore. They got a little shallower, and they started like playing the connect the dots game a little bit more, right? And then when you get here, you still see them very faint, right? But they are more like hidden inside of those micro wrinkles in there. So that's the transition we're gonna be playing. This is one of my favorite parts, to actually go from one area to another. And then when you get to around the chin, it's a similar kind of thing that happens, you know? You get around here, you're gonna see the pores probably around, yeah, around there. And then a lot around here, not in this guy here, but you know, he's, a lot of people, you can actually see a lot of pores, still have a little bit in there. But then you're gonna see like microstructures, you know, it's like those tiny little lines that gonna start forming like that. And for the forehead, it's gonna be the same way, but in the case of the chin in here, you're gonna see more vertically those lines forming, right? But as you go up to the forehead, then you're gonna see them forming more horizontally. We're gonna get around here. Some of them are vertical actually, because yeah, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of verticals here. But depending on the person, I've seen like lots of them around here, for example. They're more horizontal, right? So, and there's a lot of breakup as well. So all those areas you're gonna have to be careful and use those type of references, you know, to create this effect that they are different, almost like different specialties for different areas, right? You guys are free to ask questions. I mean, like so far we're just exploring the skin and stuff, but I'm here for you guys, so feel free. And so let's go back here to our sculpting, and let's start doing something. Instead of just
Can
yep,
I
sure.
say something?
Yeah, yep.
Man, this class blown my mind. Man, to be honest, man, I really wanted to see what was your approach about this class, because I think your special skill is how to see the things.
Yeah,
and you have the special approach to see the things with the different way. It's very particular for you. That's why everybody trying to discover what's your secret, because you discover something very special. Because I think you discover the another and different way to see the pores and the wrinkles. And I have some I'd say lighting here, enlightenment when you talk about enlightenment.
Yes,
because I think everybody have the story running under the surface of the skin, and this is completely related with the variation of the pores and the wrinkles that everybody has. And I think you can talk about this storytelling about the character or whatever, just doing this freedom and very particular point of view about the skin pores and everything. And I think you discovered something very rich, and you try to share with us. And I'm glad to be part of this new school.
That's my pleasure, man. Yeah,
man, this is new school. I think you need to fund the Genome is bullshit. The Chris Costa must be the next school, because I think you discovered something very special.
You know, I started those classes just like I was supposed to just do one of them, because you know, it's like we have a leak in our house. I want to put a new roof. But I was like, you know what happened? we know what
No,
happened.
you're trying to make the new school, I think, because it's another point of view about art.
Yeah, that's true. I'm trying to rescue, it's like a little bit of more the like the manually doing stuff, it's like in observing things instead of like getting everything ready to go and ready made. That's too easy, It's just like if you can just learn how to observe things, it's like nature, and try to recreate it. Like I said, like my approach is not like a
Yeah, you're just trying to copy you have the, how to say, is the carbon pattern. When you walk in, when you walk in the park and you look to the trees,
yes,
you see the same carbon pattern
very
wherever you're looking
yep,
for.
I agree with that.
It's happened everywhere.
Yep.
But you mimic this in the surface, on the skin, on the ZBrush. This is the first dude that approached with the professional way. This is super crazy, man. I like that.
Oh, thanks, man.
I don't want to, if I nail it in the end of the course, but I'm very glad to be part of that shit.
Oh, thanks,
it's
man.
Amazing, man. Come on, this is so nice. This is so nice. I will mute my microphone because I think I'm talk a lot of bullshit. Sorry.
All right, man. Thank you. So like going back here, so there are a couple of ways to approach this, right? So for example, like you're gonna notice that my pore in here has the dot in the middle, but has all those little arms in there, right? So when you place one or start placing a bunch of them in here, everything's gonna look very artificial at first, like I said, because we're not dealing with any variations just yet, right? But first we're gonna have to cover things up. I forgot to check, but I'm pretty sure my model is very symmetrical, and that's the reason I keep it symmetrical, so I can actually add the pores like symmetrically and have like, so I don't need to do double the work. If you want to break the symmetry, if you're having trouble doing things asymmetrically and trying to nail the likeness, and if you're uncomfortable with that, because I'm comfortable being accepting that the likeness is not going to be great until I break the symmetry, so I'm kind of used to that. But if you're uncomfortable with it, I would say you can always like save a morph target, and I would say instead of like saving at the lowest level of your model, you can go to the highest level of your subdivision without HD, before HD, right? Like in my case here at 1.1 million polygons, you can save a morph target right there. And then you can actually resymmetry, based like your model, create a symmetrical version of your model. Just like go to your modifier, right? Like the, how you call it? Let's see, deformation. And you can just go deformation and then smart resim, right? So if your model is symmetrical, it should pop right in place. So if you have that model just as a buffer, you can actually export that model as an OBJ. So at any time you can import it back if you need it, right? But at least you have like a copy of it. That's the asymmetrical version. And then you can use the symmetrical version just for the sculpting of all this detail, right? So that's an easy way to do it. The hardest way to do is basically like do double the work and then just break symmetry very early, and then do pores in like both sides, right? And then that's gonna be a pain in the butt. So we're gonna start covering some areas in here, and I normally start around here because, like I said before, even that's the thing. I'm too concerned about like doing more work here, but I'm actually more concerned about you grasping what I'm saying. So it's like easier for you guys to take from that point on. It's like, so if you're gonna do more of this work here at home tonight, or the next days, you're probably gonna get very obsessed with this because it's a little addictive, especially if you put your favorite music in the headphones and then you just like, get in the zone. I would say with my experience, to cover the entire face using symmetry, right, until here, and then in the middle, we're gonna break the symmetry because you don't want anything symmetrical in the middle. But to cover the entire mask, like this whole area, it would take me probably about 7 to 8 hours, which is like, it is a lot of work, right? 8 hours if you think about it. But if you're a professional working in the studio, that's basically 1 day of work, right? It's not a big deal. I mean, if you're in production, sometimes you spend like weeks and weeks in a single model. So like 1 day to do the entire pores is not a lot. But here's the catch about the pores. So like I said, like when you're sculpting something, you have to think about the understructures, like I mentioned before, like how with the position of the bones and everything, and how those forms are being created, because there's compression happening, right? So if there's, you know, it's like those muscles are pulling those forms, you know, it's like pulling the corners of the mouth towards the back of the head, right? Generating this form in here. There's this squint. So basically like there's another muscle lifting the cheek in here, right? And then all these forms here, they are kind of like creating this bulged area in the cheek. So in my case here, and in most people, this area here, for example, is going to be a little bit more stretched than other areas that are not like suffering the same type of deformations. So in this case here, you're basically going to have to imagine that, okay, those pores naturally going to be a little bit more spread out, but not by much, just slightly more spread out than pores in some other areas, right? And another thing on top of this is that in his case, looking at his references, he doesn't have a ton of pores visible because he's kind of like an older guy, the reference I'm looking. So he kind of passed that threshold that I mentioned, you know, it's like the pores becomes more like a microstructures and wrinkles and things like that. So it's not super visible, but I'm still gonna add them and I can soften them later because I wanna teach you guys and I wanna do a bunch of them. So I have one aside in there. I'm gonna do one, I'm gonna start in this area here first. So I apply one, for example, when I do this, I'm using a drag rectangle, right? That's basically gonna plug your alpha in there and just select the drag rectangle to create your brush, right? And then depending on how deep you sculpted it, it's gonna be a different intensity you're gonna have to use here, right? So you have to pay attention to that as well. Another thing you have to pay attention is this. So under alpha, if you go to the modifier, you're gonna see I changed a couple of things here. The first thing you're gonna notice is that I added a radial fade. So the RF, it's a 10, right? So basically this blends a circle around that pore in the middle. So it creates like a fade, right? So, and another thing you're gonna notice is this, the mid value, right? I have 89. So look what happens if I bring it down. So basically like the radial fade, you see like the alpha in here. So if I bring the radial fade to 0, now it looks like that, right? Now if I bring it up, see, it starts disappearing, right? So I would not go too crazy with the number. I would click create around like maybe 9 or 10. So I have 10. And then now the mid value, for example, if I try to apply like this with the 0, right? That's the default when you guys create. This is gonna happen. Look, it looks like a butthole in positive, right? Like it goes up. So we don't want that. We want something that's flush with the skin, because we want to be able to control that with other brushes later. So I'm gonna just go to that value I found in here. In your case, might be different. Just all this depends. So it's basically like you're gonna have to test it and see what's the value you get, you need to actually get a flush result like this. So basically to apply it, it's pretty flush with the skin, right? So that's the way you build those brushes basically after you sculpted it. So here I have my intensity at 40, and I'm gonna do some sculpting here. So again, when I'm sculpting it, I'm dragging the rectangle in a certain way. For example, I'm dragging from top to bottom. The next one I'm gonna do from side to side. The next one, top to bottom. Next one, bottom to top. Something like that, you know, it's like, so you can create a little bit more variation in between them, just if you wanna be very precious, right? So I'm creating my array in here, and you see that the main thing to observe is that they are kind of like starting to touch each other, right? I have to be very careful so that I don't create a very even pattern. So I'm gonna start breaking things up a little bit. So creating some a little bit closer, some a little bit further, right? And always trying to spin them in a little bit different way, right? So I spin in a way, drag rectangle from one side to another, and then up and down. And then I can do that kind of stuff. And this hopefully is gonna be done, yeah, in symmetry, right? Because we don't wanna do everything in both sides. So I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna start moving towards this little area here, adding some more of that. When I get to the nose itself, then for example, like they're gonna be more spread out. So I can have some of them like that, right? But then in the nose, because it's kind of like a thicker, not thicker, but it's a different type of structure of skin. Instead of like doing like I'm doing right here, you can see like the little rays around it, like we want to see because of the microstructure, right? In the nose, you're probably not going to need that. So in the nose, you can do this. Look, see, Control Z. Let me just erase that one. So for the pores in the nose, either we can create a new type of alpha, right? Or you can simply go back in resolution here inside of HD. So check this out. I have 35 million polygons right now, right? I'm gonna press Shift D, right? Or just go to your subdivision in there and go to the lowest. So I'm at 8.8 now, and then back, I'm at 2.2. So, and then 500,000 polys. So basically, like, you can go back and forth, the resolution inside of HD. That's the minimum I can get here, right? Because that's the next level after my 1.1 million polygons. And I'm just seeing like a partially just the face, right? So here, I can actually break the symmetry, for example. I can go one subdivision level higher, for example. No, lower. So the lowest one. And I broke symmetry and just gonna add some pores right here so you can see. That's too little. Let's one more. So I can add some here. Let's go. So like that, doesn't look like much, but this one here, this type of pores is more like the little dots we see, right? Instead of like having all the little microstructure being created in between them. And then when I go back to the highest level, if I start subdividing here, then you get more of those, you know, more faded kind of detail, right? So you can do that kind of stuff to add some variation for like nose pores, right? And then if you want to be precious about it, you can actually, the intensity here at 40, and just go back to like 20 or something like that. And I can just like redraw, just to add a little bit of that, you know, just get a little bit more of that pillowy kind of effect. Something like that, right? You can do that. And then there's another brush here I can show you guys. This one here, check this out. See if I can find it. It's called Pimple or something. So neck pimple, intro pimple, this one. So this brush here, the profile is like this. So I picked this Alpha 39. That's the one I normally pick for everything. I believe that's the one I picked. So Alpha 39, this one, right? Click that one. And then under your alpha here, you can change the profile. So a couple of things I changed in here. The radial fade, so it's like a RF9. And then the mid value is at 50, right? 50%. If I click in my properties here, the focal shift is at 0, so I'm not using any focal shift changes. So basically, like you access that with spacebar, right? Or with the right click. And then, so let's go back to the profile. So mid value at 50, and then radial fade at 9. And then here in the curve, so that's how I modified it, because the logic is here. Here is basically like this is the highest point, right? That's the tip of the blackhead, and then it goes down. It creates a little cavity in there, and then it goes up, and then reaches that point in there. But it's about 50%. That's why I'm using the mid value at 50%, right? So if I do this one, if I edit, now you get this type of effect right there. You see the tiny little pimples in there? So those are pretty cool. You know, it's like you can add like little guys like that right in the middle of those pores. You can create that nice little effect, you know, that look like something is actually coming out of the skin. It's basically what we want. And obviously right now I'm not painting any textures in here, right? And if I'm not painting textures, I cannot use the color stuff. But let's say like if you want to leave those ones to use later, which we can do now. So when we're actually in the process of painting the skin color and everything, we can actually paint and sculpt at the same time the blackheads. So we can add a little color in there, and as we sculpt, we can actually create the you know, the little coloring inside of the pore, which can be very helpful because it's a pain in the butt to just go later and just like try to find each one of them, you know. So I'm gonna turn on my symmetry again. I'm gonna continue with the process here of creating more pores and exploring this area. When we get like to this area here, they're gonna start getting a little bit, they're gonna follow a similar pattern as we have in there, but then we're gonna start mixing with other brushes. So let's do like a bigger area here first. Actually, it's faint right now. Let's go back to 40. And I'm gonna use 40 across the board here for this entire area. And then as I go more towards this area, the transition that I mentioned before between the wrinkles and the pores, then I'm gonna be using more faint versions of it. So like 25% or something like that. But for now, we're gonna keep those guys like pretty strong. And like I said before, it's a little zigzag, but it's not a perfect zigzag, right? We wanna have, especially in the chin, it's so easy to see when they're like too patterny. And you can see the lines, you know? So like avoid like perfect lines. So just do a little wobble with your with your hand in there. And yeah, I mean, like, if I have my favorite music going on, you know, a little Opeth. Oh man, Opeth, so good. But I like the version of Opeth that they are more progressive. I don't like the death metal stuff. But anyway, I know some of you guys are into it, but I like the progressive stuff. I can listen to like a couple of CDs while I do this, man, and they just like go to town. You know, it's like it sculpt a ton of stuff. So let me just finish a little area here so I can actually show you another trick. It's like a couple of brushes I use here to add detail to the skin and more variations. So let's say if I have something like this, I might be getting a little bit too tight in there. In that case, I can add some more here to break up a little further. If it's too spread out, so I can pick some areas in there, just like break it up like that. Maybe around here. So let's add some more in here. So once you have the pores in there, so that the first thing I mentioned is that you have to make sure that they are actually reaching out to the next, to the neighbor, right? Because if you have something like this and then the other one are here, right? There's no connection between them, and it starts looking very fake, kind of like that, all right? But if you sculpt far enough, those little arms that I call, right, to the point that they can reach the next one, or like meet halfway, let's say, then you start creating naturally those little triangles in between, right? That's basically what you see when you look at your hand, like from up close. You're not gonna see the pores themselves that much, but you're gonna see lots of little triangles and structures connecting to each other. And then, of course, like as you move to different parts of your body, is gonna see different stuff, right? Like different ways of the way they connect. So now I have like this this area here that we're gonna, after I stop the class today, I'm gonna be, you know, sculpting a bigger chunk and then post something later on. Probably gonna spend another 1.5 to 2 hours doing this. And then, so then there's this brush here, check this out. So if you have a brush like this one, which is the skin random that I built. So this brush here basically is the alpha that comes with ZBrush. That's the alpha 58, right? That one. I actually made it a little bit sharper. Actually, the contrast here, I think is pretty much, no, it's slightly sharper, but not by much, just a little bit. So the curvature, I added a tiny bit of curvature. So the contrast is at 1 here. And then, and I added a spray. The spray, I use a lot of spray for like all the painting of the skin, the color, and also for detail, right? And then you can control the placement and the flow. I play with those values a lot. Color, I always turn it off, but in this case, I'm just sculpting. It's not gonna affect anyway. But this is the default. So the flow is at 0.25, the placement is 0.5, right? So there are two uses for this brush here. So the first one is gonna look pretty ridiculous here without being in the context of the, you know, the pores and everything. But for example, like if you just drag in one direction, you're gonna get this type of effect, right? So you get that little effect, which is really cool to add directions to the pores. For example, if I go on top of that, if you have everything covered, you're gonna start seeing them, you know, it's like getting a little bit more of the direction, kind of like a little stretching, right? But if you just wanna add some micro breakup in between them to help out even further with the micro displacement, you can do this this thing in circles. One thing that I mentioned in one of my posts on Facebook not long ago was that a couple of things, aspects that people don't pay attention when they sculpt in digital media, is that they trust too much the tool itself, and basically like what it becomes just like the intensity of the brush, right? The intensity of the tool and the tool itself they are using. But a couple of things that they forget to use is basically what the traditional artists use, which is like the speed, the gesture, right? Like this, the speed you sculpt the stuff is really important, especially using this type of brush. So you can get very, very different results depending on how fast or how slow you go, and in what direction you're sculpting as well. So directionality is very important. You can create an effect by doing crisscrossing, right? Like just cross-hatching stuff. You can create another one just in a single direction, and you can create a very different one by basically like doing circular motion, right? In this case here, this brush works great for circular motion. It also depends on the speed you do it. So remember I did that little exercise just like that, right? So basically like in one direction, it did that. So let's do this in circles and see what happens. It's a very different thing. So check this out. So let's do in circles. Just like going in circles, and try not to go over the same area you already sculpted. I'm doing like very big in here so I can actually see the effect. But let's say like if you do like much smaller than this, right? That's the type of micro breakup you want to see in between those guys. So this type of stuff here, for example, this type of texture I just added is very great like for the nose, for example. You can just add that texture all the way across it and then just come go to a subdivision level lower, for example, and just smooth it out and just keep a tiny little bit of that. So I get a little bit more of that flake. And but for example, that type of effect, like the circular motion, I can add right here on top of those guys. So from this, I can get something more like this, right? It's a little strong here. I could go maybe a little bit lower in intensity because I want just like, so I have 12 by default. Let's do like 8 or something like that. And I can just like break it up. Might have to do a little bit stronger, but. So that type of effect is one thing that I can do to help me, right? To break up like the nicey kind of pillowy kind of surface. And then let's just undo this one and show a couple of other tricks that I use. So there is one brush here that's very underused, which is the elastic brush, right? The elastic brush by default, it works like this. So you're gonna get like that very high intensity of 87, right? And it's gonna work like this, look. It does this weird thing, right? It's just elastic. But then here's when it gets cool. See, like I'm going back and forth in the same you know, area here, right? So it creates this very weird kind of effect. But when you start using the elastic brush, based like just going like side to side, like that, this kind of movement, you know, it starts working much, much nicer. But then it works even nicer when you use like a much lower intensity. So instead of like going that way, with this intensity of 87, right? I'm gonna reduce this all the way to maybe like, let's see, 30, something like that. And now I get this type of effect, right? So this type of effect, what's the advantage of the elastic brush on top of, let's say, like the standard brush? So let's test it here. Let's look in here. So let's see what happens if I do elastic brush right on top of those pores. It basically like preserves the form, so I can keep building up like that, and it preserves what was already sculpted in there. So basically like uses this elasticity, right, just to pop them out. So this is very useful, for example, like in certain areas when you want to add like some deep wrinkles and forms build up around those wrinkles, but you already have detail like that. That's the kind of brush you can use, you know, it's like the elastic brush to actually help you to build up this entire form. In comparison to the standard brush now, let's look at the standard. I have the standard one here. Let's just go with nothing. And then let's just test with the standard and do a couple of passes in here. So the standard brush, when I start sculpting, look what happens. It obliterates the form, right? If I try to build a wrinkle in there, then it starts like eliminating the form. So that's the thing, you know, it's like there are two ways you can actually do this. The first one is by using the elastic brush, like I said, right? So you can actually get the form without destroying it. It's just like adding another layer underneath it. Or you can go back in subdivision levels, obviously, like that. And now let's say if I use the standard brush here to do that stuff, obviously if I go up, you should see most of the detail is still in there, right? Because it's just riding on top of it. So you see like you get plenty of the detail is still in there. But yeah, I like the elastic brush a lot to do that instead of using this kind of technique. But obviously, I mean, like sometimes if I'm just trying to fix my my primary forms, I'm not going to be even in HD. I'm going to be before HD, right? I'm going to be like in the lowest levels of my non-HD model. So there is that. So let's explore a couple of other things here. So for example, like the same way I use the elastic brush just like to create that little layer underneath, right? You can do this in combination with other stuff. For example, let's see if I go to elastic brush again, and I can just copy it. So brush clone, so I don't destroy it. And then I can just pick a little alpha in here. So I'm gonna do the drag rectangle, and I'm gonna get an alpha 39, like my favorite one, right? And let's say, let's try to do a little sculpting here. So it's created a little dot. I'm gonna make a little bit stronger than that. So I'm gonna make, let's see, 60 something, right? I can create a pore like that. So what happens, so let's, this a little bit, I think this alpha is a little bit funky. Let's get the 37. It should be a little bit more smoother transition. Yeah, so that should be good. So alpha 37, and then I'm gonna try to add some variation in the depth of those pores. Just check if my symmetry is okay. Yeah, it's good. So I'm gonna go here, and let's say I'm gonna pick a couple of those here, this guy, and right on top of it, I'm gonna just like draw it like that, right? So that way, it's basically not gonna destroy everything, anything that's already there, and I can add some variation. Same I can do like, you know, going positive like that, just to add a tiny pimple in there if I want to, right? But in this case here, it's a little sharp. I would have to tweak my curve to make it better. But this is actually quite perfect for exaggerating pores, right? And I can even do like a less intense like that, and let's say 50, and then do like a bigger one like that. So actually get a bigger area, right? Something like that. So we start adding some variation. Obviously, you kind of like try to pick the ones you're gonna go like very randomly, right? Like not like in a line or anything like that. So that can help as well to add more of a natural feel, right? Very easily you can start seeing like how he breaks up the entire thing, right? It's not like a pattern you can actually instantly recognize. But yeah, keep in mind all those things I'm telling you guys, because it's very easy to get a pattern to appear and get stuck to that pattern. You know, it's like especially humans, we try to create like order into everything, right? And we have this thing about like, oh, we want to make sure that everything, especially OCD people. I'm a little bit OCD, but not much. And they want to create this order thing, right? So that this class is probably not for you if you're OCD, because we're trying to break some order in here. And I told like my previous group that I used to be the kind of guy that I had, you know, it's like
how can sorry to interrupt you, but the drunk people have some space on this class.
Oh, what's that? Drunk people?
No, I'm trying to broke the pattern. Sorry.
Yeah. So so let's say, for example, like if you have, I said that like in the previous class, you know, it's like if you have, you know, it's like you observe the form in nature, right? And like he was saying before, you know, it's like you can see those patterns repeating themselves, right? Like I'm gonna show some tricks. For example, when I sculpted the veins and I painted the veins for the nose, the micro vein stuff, I was actually using some lightning photographs. So let me just go back here and just pull this one so you can see it. That's the guy, blah, blah, blah. Let's see, maybe let's look at here. Personal projects, let's go to Stan and images. Oh, my hard drive just slept, it's coming back. Okay, so for example, let's see like a close-up one. I think this one you might be able to see. So those micro veins here I added, you see the cheeks right there? Oh, this peach fuzz is so strong though, I have to fix it later. But yeah, there's some micro veins right here, right there. Some of them are basically hand painted, but some of them I actually found this, I thought like, what in nature has this, this pattern that we can use actually to create this type of structures? And then I decided to use them for the micro veins in the eyes. And I thought like a lightning. So I got like pictures, black and white pictures of lightning. Actually, it was a colored one, and I just transformed into black and white. And I started using it as the pattern for veins, you know. And it's very interesting because you know, it's like if you look at the universe itself, right? It's almost like humans are a miniature of the universe. It's like it's a trippy way to think about it, but it's almost like those patterns repeat like forever, right? You see like the shape of the for example the cells of your brain, right? The way that they connect, they look like mini galaxies and stuff, right?
Sorry, Chris, I don't want to interrupt you again, but I think your philosophy is very interesting today. I can't handle myself.
Oh, thanks, man.
When you started to talk about the pattern in the universe, I remember the film that I watched called the Pie. Pie is the very interesting film that the director show up all the carbon structure that meanings in the same pattern, and when the guy dropped the milk on the coffee, start to make the how the name of the pattern of the perfect. You showed this in another classes before. When you have the caracol, how to say that in English? I don't remember. When you have the pattern going up to make the perfect Fibonacci.
Oh, okay, yeah, totally.
And the guy show all the structures in the nature is just trying to make the Fibonacci by itself.
Yeah,
and I think you're talking about that right now.
Yeah, I was watching an interview just today with John Cleese, which was one of the actors for Monty Python, right? And I just love those guys, man. And he was talking about like how pretentious our scientists are, right? Like, I mean, like we take science as religion and we don't question much, you know? And especially me as an artist, you know, it's like I question everything. I don't take anything like, you know, it's like I believe what they say and everything, but I keep like a good chunk of my my own brain to imagine things and to wonder, you know. It's like as an artist you have to save us a little space for wondering, and he said like exactly that, you know. It's like he mentioned like the accidents, you know. It's like, is it really an accident, right? Like because like at least like when I look at nature, everything is a pattern, and that repeats itself, of course. But if you look at nature like from a distance, right, like everything looks pretty chaotic. You look at the forest, it's pretty chaotic. But when you go to the micro level, right, like, you know, you start observing like the way that the structure of the leaves are, and then the cells that are part of that, and everything is very organized, you know. And it's hard to believe that everything comes from chaos, absolute chaos, because nothing looks chaotic to me when you look at the very close level, you know.
I agree. Sorry, my buddies say for me, be quiet because we need to learn CG. Okay, I will be quiet. I will mute myself.
Yeah, dude. There you go. Yeah, but I like the trip, man. It's like part of it. So yeah, I mean, like, don't worry too much if this stuff like it's starting to get a little bit too chaotic, because there's a lot we can do to actually either bring more order to it or just add even more asymmetry and more chaos to it. But the important thing is that we're gonna start like actually opening up the distances. So I'm gonna add some more in-betweens in here, because I wanna open up the distance when you get more towards the cheeks. And make no mistake, man, I'm doing this here because I have certain experience with this, because I do like for my models, but it can be a pain in the butt to nail the distance between them, you know, sometimes, and make it look natural. And I think great part of it, so please pause if you are going this direction here. I really don't mind if you guys want to use, for example, like texturing XYZ or anything to help your work. But this kind of stuff, you know, is like that if you don't have access to texturing XYZ, and or for example, you have access to part of it, and you're just like, okay, I have the face, but I don't have stuff like chest or whatever, you know. And this is the kind of technique you can use to help you to actually build areas that are just gaps, you know, to make it look nicer. And the thing is, like, because it's so precise and we are using such like a high resolution mesh, this is stuff here you get much more crispness when you actually render, you know. Obviously you can use like super high res maps and paint stuff in Mari and use the texturing XYZ like that, But this way you're actually practicing your sculpting skills, you know. Now, what happens if some area is not exactly like I was expecting? Well, in this case here, you're screwed because you're sculpting HD, and like I said, it's not like you're not going to have access to layers. So what I would do, I would just erase that area and then just resculpt. One thing that I would try to avoid, and I hope you guys avoid as well, is to resculpt on top of what you already have. So if you want to sculpt something, make sure that you completely erase that area, like really smooth it out. And for example, if I want to erase this area, sometimes the smooth itself, it gets a little bit tricky because it doesn't smooth all the way. So sometimes you can go back in resolution here inside of HD, like maybe once or twice, smooth that, go to the next level higher, smooth again, and then go to the last one and smooth again, and then you can get like a perfect smooth. But yeah, if you start like poking around too much and adding more stuff on top of what you already have, then all of a sudden you're gonna lose this structure of the pores, right? Like this this micro networking here, and then things like, sorry, yep.
Early on, you mentioned something about creating a prox mesh before going to HD.
A prox?
Yes, a prox mesh.
A proxy mesh. Did I say that?
Yeah, something like before breaking the symmetry, you go and to the morph target and save one.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So for example, like if let's say you guys, in this case, let's get out the HD here so you can see it. So I'm gonna just do I'm gonna press A outside. So we're gonna get out of HD. Let's do that. So now I'm out of HD, right? And then let's say you have this model here completely asymmetrical, right? So let's say, let me just save this so I don't lose anything. Save as, and then now I'm gonna go HD. So I'm gonna put 16, HD 16, actually 17. So that's gonna be my latest. So when you save HD, you're gonna see, I'm gonna show this first before I go that route. So let's see the size of the file. So now my file is about 143 megabytes, right? And before I saved HD, it was like 129. So I already added a little bit, but this is gonna start like adding up. Every time I add more detail and cover more area, this number is gonna grow all the way up to maybe like 1 gigabyte after everything is covered. So between 1 and 1.5 gigabytes, that should be the number for the entire thing. So just so you know, that's the size you can expect for HD, or larger a little bit, right? So what I was saying is this. So check this out. So let's say, like I said before, you guys have your model already asymmetrical, right? Because my dynamic here got funky. Let's double click. So let's say you are having a hard time matching your references, and then because this guy had a bigger face on one side and his chin was to the side, and you decide to really nail it. I'm gonna do something very funky here. The ears are a little bit more messed up on one side, right? So you had something like that, and that's how you matched your reference, for example. So before you go HD, right, make sure you have this model completely symmetrical. So to do that, for example, I'm at the last, just remember, like I started with the 17,000 polys, right? So I subdivided a couple of times until I reached a number that's less than 2 million polygons, which in my case is 1.1. And then I'm gonna export a base mesh, this OBJ here. So I'm gonna go and I'm gonna say, actually, before that, I think I can do like, the level before this would be better. So 277. So actually, I'm not eliminating everything. So 277 here. So basically, like instead of going to the highest level before HD, one subdivision level less than that. And then I'm gonna export this one. So this is gonna be my, actually OBJ. Ray, medium resolution, 5 temp. That's gonna just for now, just for a test. And then now let's pretend that's the model you had, but you need to generate like a symmetrical version, right? So we're gonna just go to your smart resymmetry, make sure it's symmetrical, right? And now, of course, like I would have to, it's like smooth this area here to make sure that everything is very symmetrical, right? Smooth the middle area. And then with this model here, that's the model I would go HD with, right? So I go HD, I can do all the sculpting I want. And then after I finish the sculpting with all the pores and everything, then you can just recover the HD, right? The pose you had. So you can just go like click your model in there, make sure you're in the same resolution you are before you exported it. And you should just go to import, right? Just import it. And then you get your mesh adapted back like to the symmetry you had, but now with all the detail right on top of it. That's all I was saying. It's just to create a buffer, you know, in case you broke the symmetry too early. That's it.
Oh, I see. And it will preserve all the HD geometry. That was my main.
Yes, you preserve
impression.
everything.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks,
The other thing about the HD is that you can, at any time, you can project HD to non-HD, non-HD to HD, HD to HD. The way it works is basically like if you have a model all HD already and you need to reproject to the next one that's HD because you changed topology, for example, which I do not recommend, right? I recommend going HD only when you have your topology blocked. But if you don't and you change something, then you can project one to another one. But the thing is, like, I would not recommend projecting bigger chunks than, let's say, between 10 and 15 million polygons at a time. So you would have to actually go selectively, right? So you would just like select an area like this and try to project that into the next HD model. And to do that, you would have to go HD in both, right? So we'd go to the highest resolution of this guy, press A around here, go HD, click the next subtool, go to the highest subdivision, press HD again, and then you would have both in HD and you can project one to another one. It works just fine. And then let's say, in this case here, another thing that happens with HD is that, let's say, let's enter HD around here. Let me just make sure I get just this side here, maybe both sides, this one. And then now I want to make sure that I bake the HD formation because I want to 3D print whatever is in HD, because that's a possibility, right? I want to do this for one of my models. I want to create a mask that's with all the HD detail. So I'm going to go HD here. And then now I got this model here that's about 18 million polygons, which is just the two sides with, let's pretend I have all the pores applied in there, right? So it's very easy. I mean, like 18 million polygons, I think ZBrush can handle it. You can just click Make Polymesh 3D. Or you can go, just to guarantee, you can go like a smaller chunk. For example, like if I have something like this, I press Solo. And then let's say I just export the mask itself, like something like this, right? So I'm just going to make this part here visible. And I can export an HD model baked, which is just pressing Make Polymesh 3D. So just click that one. Gonna take a little bit. And now I have this mask in here. It says Make Polymesh 3D. And now this is baked. So this is a model with like 13 million polygons, which has all the HD information baked. So if I'm about to print like a 3D print this, it would be fine, you know. I can actually this from this point on, I can actually decimate things and make even smaller, you know. And then obviously you can actually create like some keys and maybe, you know, print the top part of the mask and then the bottom part of the mask, and then have everything in HD. So that's just a curiosity, you know. It's like you can do a lot of stuff with HD. You're not completely locked in there. You could potentially, if you want to eliminate the HD completely, you could start with a model like this, and then, for example, like subdivide a model a bunch of times. Let's say like a non-HD, right? You go to 45 million polygons non-HD, and then project from HD to this, right? And then completely bypass the HD use even if you went that route. The disadvantage is that you're probably going to have to, if you're exporting displacement maps, you're going to have to wait a lot, right? Because it's not as fast as exporting with HD. So I'm going to just delete this so we don't have that as a trash in there. And then go back to my actual subtool. And yes.
How's it going?
Good.
I had some tips, maybe.
Sure.
We can call them tips.
Yep.
I was sculpting a butthole, as you mentioned, during the class today. And in the alpha menu, in the bottom of alpha menu, the curve, we can add a point in that curve and add a bit of level, I mean, with changing that curve, it changed the alpha you've made. I mean that single pore, single skin pore, and it for somewhere you want to have less bumpy skin pore, you can use that to have a less bumpy pore, and you can after save the brush with that alpha, different brush with a less bumpy skin pore. For in terms of when you want to have a variation.
Oh, sure, yeah, for different areas, right?
Yeah, and another one is same in the alpha menu. There is.
Let me just open the scene here.
Wait, yeah.
I'm gonna reopen the original one. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Can you grab that plane with the single pore?
Oh, sure. Yeah. This one.
You can go to alpha menu. And there is something called from mesh under the alpha.
From mesh, yes.
Yeah, you can hit press that. And here you can change the map size in the bottom.
Yeah, yeah.
And when you press OK, it makes an alpha that's map size.
That resolution.
And yeah, it's not camera projection alpha. It's a 3D projection alpha.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it's kind of like vector displacement.
Oh, interesting.
For example, yeah, and when you go in alpha menu, you can see a 3D text beside in alpha menu.
Alpha menu.
Yeah, when you select this new alpha you just made.
Yep.
Yeah, that's it's upper.
Is
the last alpha you have.
This one. Yeah.
Yeah, go to alpha menu. You must see a 3D text beside the big alpha. But never mind, it's kind of like 3D projection, and when it's not that much it's not that much interesting in this specific skin pore. But we have something like tentacle came out of a mesh. And for in camera projection you cannot see underneath of that tentacle. But in this case, when you make the alpha with that from mesh button, you can have all the details even underneath that tentacle that camera projection cannot.
Oh, that's cool. That's an actual 3D alpha, like they say in that.
Yes.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Sure, man.
Yeah.
Maybe it helps in some of those alphas you're gonna make.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Thank you.
Sure, man.
And then, another thing that I forgot to mention is this one here. That's my cheat. Look at this. So what I did, I actually sculpted with the same technique I'm using right now in the face. I sculpted this little array in here, right? And then I captured the same way. I mean, like you can do the same, the way that he said, maybe like make into a 3D pattern. I captured just like the regular way, just like with the grab document, right? Or with the MRGBZ grabber. So I transformed that one into another brush, and then what happens when you have that is that the cheat, right? So basically, like if I have something like the mask, I try to sculpt everything by hand. So I do this entire area, muzzle, chin, and forehead, most of it. Let's say like the eyebrows area, everything by hand. But then when it comes like to the top of the forehead and the sides of the face, I don't want to do the entire thing like one by one, all the pores. So we can actually use a little cheat. So if I go to the side here, and I just like unhide this area, and then we can do a little sculpting here just to show you. I'm gonna enter HD again, press A. And then I can grab this guy here, which is, okay, I had single pore. Let's see if I can find it. Multi-pores. I think, is this the one I did? No, this is the old one. There's another one. I have to name this multi-porous, this one. So that's the one I created from that plane, right? So what this one does, I actually create like an entire array like that, so I can cover a larger area at once. And then instead of like doing on top of it, because I'm gonna create like this little mess right in the middle, right? I try to avoid that and create like, let's say, something like this until they barely touch each other. And then everything that's in between, I actually retouch and then sculpt manually. All right, just to make sure that I have everything like without a lot of intersection between them. And obviously, like the key here is to actually try to keep everything in a very similar size. So when you draw those little guys, and then in between, you're gonna basically like fill them, you know? So that way you can actually cover a large area very fast instead of like doing it one by one. And this sculpting the in-betweens here is easy after you do like, you submit yourself to this torture of sculpting the whole face. So that's another way to do it, you know. Yeah, just make sure you create a pattern that it looks random enough, because again, if you have obvious patterns in there, then for example lines and things like that, then it's gonna show straight away, you know. You're gonna see what's going on straight away. And then let's go back here to my single pour, this guy. And tomorrow we're gonna be actually, because let's say it's almost time, but today I'm gonna continue this thing in the spirit of what I said before, you know. It's like I'm gonna show you how to do it, at least like this first pass. And I'm not gonna add anything different from what I already told you today. I'm just gonna be continue to do this whole thing. You're gonna make this guy smaller. Gonna continue to fill this entire area and probably muzzle, and then post this one later, probably in my Instagram and then Facebook. And then yes, for tomorrow we're gonna start like playing with the variations, adding micro wrinkles, and you know, it's like if we have a line like this, we try to avoid creating a perfect line that just goes across all the pores. What we try to do is normally try to play the connect the dots game, right? So if there is a wrinkle, it's basically like it's the path of less resistance, right? That's happening. So if there's a wrinkle, it's probably like those pores, they're actually bending and connecting to each other and creating a line, but it's a very irregular line. It's not like a straight line that cuts across the entire thing. It's just like those guys, basically like if you're bending a piece of foam that has all those little dots built in, they're gonna basically like they're gonna give up easier than the thicker structures, right? So you're gonna see the line being formed, like connecting between them. So we're gonna be talking about this tomorrow, and then sculpting this areas of transition as well. Probably gonna do the sculpting of the eye bags tomorrow, because it's just mostly wrinkles. And then the pour is gonna be about what I mentioned today, and then obviously, as I'm sculpting more stuff in the next days, I'm going to be commenting of every single step, what I'm doing exactly, so you guys can get a perfect idea of what's going on. But today, it's just going to...
Ayman, I have another question about the sculpting the single pour that you want to project later. Because you've done it a lot of times, it's a bit up to you. To sculpt that single pour. But I wanted to know what is too bumpy and what is less bumpy in terms of sculpting that single pour, because I've sculpted one about 20 minutes ago, and it feels a bit less bumpier than yours and doesn't work like yours work. And wanted to know if you if you just look at it and you feel it's okay or not, or you have something more technical or more precise.
No, to me, it's everything I do is very idealized, you know. It's like that's my interpretation of what I see. But I'm not going to say like, okay, there's no better way of doing this. I'm pretty sure there is a better way. Actually, in fact, like every single step of everything I'm going to be showing you guys, I actually stopped working on it as soon as things started to work for me, right? But if I, basically like every single step I'm showing, I can push it further if I put more time in it, right? And I think like you guys can do the same. So if you're testing stuff and you find out like, okay, so this one, I just create this pore here is actually working better because those cross sections here are producing a better microstructure in there, I would say go for it, you know, not necessarily like stick with what I'm showing. I think like most of the stuff I show during this class are very conceptual, you know, in a way that, okay, learn how to observe things and then come up with your own way of like doing it. But at the same time, of course, like if you want to follow what I'm doing, like with the visual reference and things like that, you should be able to get the same results, you know, or very similar. Of course, the experience and the way that I'm applying those things is going to play a role, obviously, but you know.
Yeah, because I'm asking it because you experienced a lot of renders with this approach.
Yeah.
And these scheme pores are gonna affect the render later.
Yes.
But when we don't have any experience to sculpt even a single pore, and we have to sculpt it and sculpt that pore and make an alpha and use that alpha to sculpt
yes,
at least a big chunk of face, and then try to render it, and then we can notice they're not gonna work in render. And because of that, I wanted to know, is it that specific to have to avoid having too bumpy pores, or no? No, it's fine. You can test and you can find out yourself.
Well, it's like I think the distance is more important than the bumpiness itself, because the bumpiness itself you can correct them, right? If you sculpt a certain area and it's not working, you're not going to cover the entire face until you discover that it's not working, right? You basically going to sculpt a little piece, like let's say like this piece here, that if I was completely quiet and just sculpting it would take me probably like 15 minutes or 10 to 15 minutes, and then basically like export a displacement map and then test if it's working, right? So what I'm gonna do, unfortunately today I cannot do it, but tomorrow we're gonna start by actually exporting whatever I have in here, exporting the displacement map. I'm gonna show you the settings and everything. So today I would say, like, you know, don't go too crazy with the pores, like with the sculpting of the surface, but make sure that you get like a nicely sculpted pore at least, you know, it's like one of them that you can create a little array and stuff. Because if it's not working, then you can actually tweak it, right? And make a little bit deeper or not. When I have, for example, like something like a plane like that, and then I notice that when I am applying them, I don't have enough of those little forms in here. I'm gonna actually, you know, it's like just sculpt them to have more of this pillow effect. And if it's too deep, for example, I can just like very, you know, go to my scale here, and I can actually just bring everything shallower like that, right? And then you have a little shallower, you know, or deeper, whatever you want to do, with just by scaling it, right? But it's all like a matter of like testing it. And so, just like I said, you know, it's like don't go too crazy with the cover the entire thing until you do a few tests. This actually happened in the previous class. You know, it's like they start covering too much stuff, and then but you know, the distance is not working, blah blah blah, and that happens. You know, it's like it's just a matter of like really trying to capture that that likeness of the skin, I would say. But yeah, there's no way other than doing a few times, you know. And I hope you're not gonna redo like the entire face like a couple of times. It's gonna be just like a little chunk like that redone a couple of times until you get the distances, and then from that point on should be fine, you know. But like I said, if the distance is correct, like the bumpiness and stuff, it's gonna come like in different ways, you know. But it would be ideal if you can get at least those little networks, you know, those little pillars to behave a little bit similarly to this, you know, because at least I know how they render and how they work, you know. They actually function very well. But it is a challenge, man, because like I mean, like a couple of those guys in the previous class, they got a really nice results, and then some of them didn't quite get the same result, you know. But the technique was exactly the same. It's just the distance and the way that they sculpted the pores, you know. And some of them actually decided to redo it, and the results are much better now. But yeah, it's a little bit of an exercise in there.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, it might be challenging, you know. It's like you might get a little in trouble, but then once you get the form to behave like for one pore, everything starts like really working, you know. It's just a matter of like really nailing at least one pore. And like I said, like with the visual reference, you should be able to, you know. It's just like if you can reproduce that one, you can totally do it. Yeah, I have no doubt about that. And then for, let's see, we are at 11:34, so we're kind of like done with the class. But like I said, I'm gonna be going on with this, so you can record that, and that's gonna be the beginning. And then from this point on, you should be able to see probably tonight, probably like a chunk of this area here, maybe the cheeks and a chunk of this area here. You're gonna see probably a little bit difference of distance between them. I'm going to start spreading out a little bit more around this area here because this stretch. And then tomorrow we're going to be sculpting some wrinkles to connect them, add some more asymmetry, not asymmetry, but more variation, but more like bumps and bruises and things like that. So it's going to be a fun day, but hopefully I'm going to have a good area covered.
Chris,
yeah.
Quick question, very quick.
Yeah.
Does Morph Target work with HD geometry?
Not inside of HD geometry. It's going to work fine outside of HD. So for example, if you want to save them there before you go HD, it's going to work. But here, when you're in HD, normally you have like it's a huge amount of polygons. And then I think in between like entering and coming out of HD, I think it basically it doesn't save it, you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No problem. So guys, I think that's it for today. I hope you got some of this stuff, at least like the theory behind it, and the visual reference that can help you to start with a single pore. But like I said before, this is my own trip, I guess. Like this is the fly on the wall that you guys are just watching this idiot working everything manually. So you don't actually have to go that route if you don't want to. Like I said, like in my previous group, I don't blame anyone if they want to use the texturing XYZ or anything else. This is kind of like, it's a challenge, you know. It's kind of like, okay, if you guys want to challenge yourself to learn how to do this stuff manually, once you get it, and it probably is not going to be the first try, but once you get it, it's going to be pretty interesting, you know. It's like it's this thing about playing God, you know. It's like building stuff by hand and then learning how the structures of the skin and the different types of skin happen in different parts of the face, you know. It's an interesting challenge. I think you guys should try.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Yeah,
that was awesome.
Thank you, guys. And I see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow. Have a great night.
You too. Thank you.